Hi, welcome to the Hmong Woman podcast. My name's Dochi.
I'm Emily.
I'm Ariel.
And make sure if you are not yet following us, give us a follow, like this video if you enjoy it. And if there's anything along the way that comes to mind as you're listening to this episode, please comment it below. This episode, we're going to be talking about getting comfortable with failure, rejection, falling short, maybe failing a project, and just really recalling moments of failures or moments that made you feel not the best. Let's start off with situations where you felt this couldn't get any worse. You guys have any of those in mind?
Yeah, I've had many moments of failure where I felt like, dang, it cannot get any worse, and then it does get worse. I think one that comes to mind the most is like my driving situation. For a long time, my parents did not want to let me learn how to drive. And so I was driving illegally without a permit or a license. And then I got into trouble with the law. And I thought, oh my gosh, this situation really cannot get any worse. And then I found out that it could. And it was really hard for me to even get reinstated to be eligible to get a license. And that process took 5 years. And so I was taking the bus everywhere and anywhere. And I always felt like a failure and really bad because I would have to have my friends like pick me up if we wanted to go somewhere and they would be driving. Because if I got caught driving, straight to jail. It was really hard for me to like feel like a successful person, regardless of all the other things that I had accomplished and were doing at that time, is that because it's still so fresh. I mean, I only started driving again 2 years ago because that was when I was eligible after completing all of the steps needed by Minnesota government to be able to drive. So, yeah, that's the situation that comes to mind the most because I did feel like a failure having to like depend on people to drive me and like taking the bus everywhere. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with taking the bus. I still enjoy taking the bus. But it just like, you just feel so far behind compared to all of your other peers who like, they're driving and they have cars and you're kind of like, I can't do any of that because I have to fulfill all of these requirements first. And how do you even explain that to people too? So I'm glad that I went through that process because I wouldn't have been able to learn it and able to help other people go through that as well.
So I took a completely analytical approach to this. I was like, man, there's so many moments in my life where I feel like I was a failure. How can I accurately tell people about this? And so in my mind, I was like, it's action-based and emotion-based. So some actions that I've done in the past that have made me a failure or made me feel like it is that like something really easy, whether I'd like forget a school deadline or I'd fail a class, I always feel like I could do better. And I would constantly beat myself up around it because I didn't do my best. And then pretty recently, a couple months ago too, so business-wise, I actually really messed up and I help a lot with the hotel reservations for one of my clients because he does retreats. But I messed up so badly that I forgot to send the hotel an updated rooming list. And so when they got to their destination and everyone had flown in for the retreat, they were there. We finally realized that we forgot to add on one hotel room for the extra person that had joined. And so that in itself, oh my God, when I got that call, my heart stopped. Like it dropped to the pit of my stomach because not only did my failure impact myself, but it also impacted someone else, someone who's paid money, someone who wants to, have a good time on the retreat. It's impacting not only myself, but the person who runs it and the person attending. So those were two really big things that were action-based failures where I was like, man, that's where I really effed up. But emotion-based, I really thought about when are some times that I felt like a failure. So for me, and for others, I know that we can sometimes feel like a failure when we're rejected when dating. So a big hump that this took to me was that I, for some reason, took that to my self-worth and to my attractiveness. But really working through that and learning not to take it personally anymore was how I worked through that one, of just learning that it either wasn't meant to be or, it's no longer tied to your attraction or self-worth. Some other emotion-based failures that I've went through is being rejected or ghosted by a potential client. So there are times where I literally sit there and I'm like, oh, I really, really want to work with this person. We have the same values. We have the same mission. Like, she and I would get along so well. And so a lot of the times in business, you're constantly going to get rejected and you're constantly going to be made to feel like a failure, I feel like. And I always like to say, business is not for the weak. And learning about not taking it internally and not making it as my fault or as if I did something wrong really does help me in understanding that sometimes when you're being ghosted with other people or you feel that feeling of rejection, the universe is just telling you that that person isn't your ideal client, or better yet, you guys were just not meant to work together at that certain time. So I feel like for me, that was another big thing that I learned over the past couple of years, because I'm about 3 years in almost on my business journey, is really just not internalizing what other people have going on and not making it feel as if I did something too. And obviously this comes into play with, like people-pleasing tendencies and all that, and me being a recovering people pleaser, but that's just one of the things that stuck out as well.
I really like that the two routes of action-based, feeling-based. I didn't even think about that when I was reading through the question and trying to think about my failures. I said not really, because, and that's not to say like I'm so perfect, I've never failed in life. When I really thought about it, I didn't really see failure because I felt I didn't take enough risks to be able to. So I felt that my approach in life has led me to miss out on a lot of opportunities. And I feel that that's what failure is the ability to fail in order to grow. And that made my growth stagnant. And so in reflecting on that, I just realized that a lot of times if I could foresee that I would not be able to do a project, or it was a self-confidence thing. If I felt I couldn't do it and I could not get to a certain point, I would not do it. I would reject it. I'm very self-conscious as a person, and that really plays a part into this whole theme of failure, not wanting to show up as a failure because it's shown in a very negative light, like the term failing, But the older I've gone, the more I've realized in order for me to grow and to perfect things, I have to be able to get comfortable with failing. And as Emily explained earlier with, your example of how you felt you were a failure, that to me was that whole situation. I've always seen you as a really strong person. And so that goes with the perspective of how you see yourself and how others view you. I've always thought you were a strong person because I was like, I don't think I would be able to ever do that. I don't know how I would, number one, deal with a situation. Number two, navigate and still be able to juggle jobs, and not just that, but an education too. And as you said, there are so many accomplishments that you had during the time, but really focusing in on that failure piece made me just realize, growing up, had I had one of those situations, took the risk to do this, I might have failed, but I would have grown and taken out this entire experience from it. That's why I generally felt that I don't have a lot of failures. But as you guys were talking and providing your examples too, I realized also moments in my life where it could be deemed as failing at something. I more so look at it as an opportunity. So I think I look at it more in a positive light than I do negatively. And I think that has a lot to do with my emotions that are tied to it. So for example, I don't know why I didn't think of this, is my marriage. Being a divorced individual, people would usually say that's a failed marriage. And yes, it did not work out. But for some reason, I don't look at it as a failed part of my life. I look at it as we tried, we learned a lot, it didn't work out, and I I don't know how he's doing, but I'm assuming we're both fairly happy people. We've grown a lot from it. I know I've grown a lot from it, and I know it would not have made sense for me to continue to stay just so I could say that this is a successful marriage. It would have been detrimental on my mental health, myself, and I believe his too. And so that's why I look at it as more of a success than a failure. So, how did you guys, I think we kind of went over this too, but how do you guys typically face failure in your life? Maybe how did you face it before and how do you face it now?
I used to, when I failed, I used to curl up in a ball on the floor and cry. No, I'm kidding.
Me too.
I did not do that.
Like, damn. Right. No, I hope it was never that serious.
I did not curl up in a ball and cry. No, in situations where I felt like a failure or there was an actual result of me having failed that needed task, I typically would just compartmentalize. Okay, I effed up. What can I do to fix it? How can I move forward? Mm-hmm. And I allow myself to say, okay, here's how I failed. How am I feeling about it? Okay, this is how I'm feeling about it. How can I move forward and not make that same mistake? One that I can think in particular is like there was a deadline that needed to be met. I just got muddled with work and I forgot about that deadline. And so I was like, shoot, that was on me. I forgot about the deadline, even though it was on my calendar. And I didn't do my best work with it because I'm like, I just need to put something together and give it to them. And that was my mistake, right? That was my failure. It was like, it didn't address the actual project that needed to be finished. And that was obviously seen. I effed up. I forgot about the deadline. Let me work on it. And of course, when you hold yourself accountable, my coworkers are really gracious about it. They're like, totally understandable. Let's move the deadline to next week. That's the mindset that I have now. Is it's depending on what kind of project and what kind of situation it is. Like with that project specifically, I let myself feel bad and I let myself sulk for a little bit, but then I was like, okay, I just need to get up and go. I just need to do it and get it done and over with. That's how it is for me. That's how I'm able to like feel accomplished afterwards. And it's not that I don't address the feelings that I felt at that time. But in regards to rejection, right? I remember getting rejected for a job offer or a job interview, and I was like, oh my gosh, like you said earlier, right? You feel like the lowest of lows, like you feel like you're the problem and you need to fix yourself. But it just wasn't meant for you at that time. And, someone else was meant for that position. It didn't mean that you were underqualified, or it didn't mean that you were not good enough. And so that's how I do it. That's how I navigate failing something that I think I shouldn't have failed in the moment.
My experience is pretty much the same. And I'll use the previous example of forgetting to make reservations or setting the updated rooming list to the hotel. How I came back from that is that obviously I apologized and I took accountability for what I did wrong. And I think that's what makes being a virtual assistant so hard, especially as a recovering perfectionist, is a part of your job is to get everything right. But as a human being, you have to understand too that you're not Superwoman and you're human and you can't always do everything correctly. And instead of, trying to do everything correctly, you have to recognize when you make mistakes and you have to take accountability for them. And so that's exactly what I did for that failure. Is I went ahead and just like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry. Let me look around the area and I can help, reserve a room around where you guys are staying. And then we can talk about things later. And so unfortunately at that point, the person I was working with, he was like, oh, it's okay. Like, I just want to let you know, put this on your radar that you did miss a room, but it's not a big deal because I've already paid for a separate room in another, hotel down the block for me to stay at. And so everything is covered, everything's fine, but just please do not do this again. And so really understanding that I did something wrong and I took accountability for it, I then went through the process of forgiving myself and understanding that I may not get it right every single time, but what matters is what I do afterwards. And that shouldn't stop me from trying to do my best. And similar to Emily, when you do fail, it's important to come up with a game plan on how you can react better the next time and how you can act better in a similar situation in the future. Because I don't ever want to be in that situation ever again where it's my fault that someone doesn't have a hotel room for an already paid retreat.
So I guess the way I took this question in like previously way in the past, how I would deal with failure, is again, previously it was like, if it was not my expertise, I wouldn't even try it. And so I don't have a lot of examples of like how I would even face it, failure in general. And I had to dig on a little bit deeper on why that was. Because for me, I didn't do anything that might lead me to failing because of my family. Because most of the berating and the criticism came from my own people. And I don't think that it was necessarily meant to come in a negative sense, but it did. I think it was supposed to help me grow, but it wasn't constructive criticism. It was just criticism. And for that reason, I didn't want to face the constant berating and being like forced to acknowledge that failure so publicly and so much privately, and not knowing how to grow from it. So previously, I just did not have the tools or the experience or the anything in dealing with failure, because I really didn't. And then when I got older, I started to realize that, and then taking more risk, learning how to kind of go through all that was hard, because I really didn't know how to react when something didn't go the way that I intended it for or to go. So Emily's example earlier of like, if I were to apply for a job and get rejected, I typically did not apply for jobs if I did not meet at least all the expectations. Until I remember you telling me like, you know what, if you think that this is a job that you meet some of the expectations, more oftentimes than not, women will not apply to jobs because they don't meet the minimum requirements, and men will, even if they don't meet one of the minimum, and they will get hired and the woman won't. And I'm like, well, okay, well shit, let me go ahead and apply anyways then. So I've gotten a lot better at doing that. But even with rejection, my thought has always been, I'm a firm believer of, if it's not meant to be, it's not. But not taking that in the sense of not putting in any effort. Put in effort, but if there's resistance and it doesn't work out, I think the universe has something better for you. And so I think with that mindset, it's really made me feel that this isn't a fail, this isn't a rejection, this is for the better. And same thing with like getting rejected in, whether that's through friendships or romantic kind of settings. Emily knows about this. I've done my fair share of like making the first move, and I'm okay with that, because I feel that if I like something or I like someone, I'm okay with sharing that now. I don't like missing out on opportunities as I used to. So if I think that someone has a great personality and I enjoy their presence, I'm okay with asking them like, you want to go out? And that happens very few and far, but even if I do that and I get, whether that's gently rejected or terribly rejected, either way it's a win. If you're rejecting me terribly and like, oh my God, like you're not even my type of, oh, great, because the way you're responding tells me a lot about that. That to me is not a fail. It's like an accomplishment. Like, I just saw the real you, and thank you for that. And even if you're gently rejecting me, okay, great, thank you. So that's how I view rejection generally.
Well, I do want to touch on like 2 points that you said too, with that mindset shift. I think a big part of it is how we grew up and how like we were told about failure with our family, right? I think that's something that, especially I feel like within the Hmong community, we're very set on being perfect and like not showing your failures publicly, as you said earlier, Dochi. And like, what are we being told growing up about failure, and how are we being told to deal with failure, and how is that affecting how our mindset is about failure? Now as an adult, now I'm like, when I have struggles, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, right? And so like, what are you being told as you're growing up by your family about failure and how to deal with it? So I wanted to touch that because you made a really good point about like how you grow up and the people you're surrounded by and how they treat failure. I know my elders, they're like, don't show your failure publicly, but then I see them with their mistakes all the time, and it's like, yeah, like what happened to that, right? And like obviously that's very toxic to think that way, but it's like, you know, you told me growing up that I needed to be perfect, and now here I am, like, struggling to deal with that. Obviously my mindset has shifted, and I deal with rejection and failure a lot better now, where I'm like, okay, I failed in that moment, that's fine, brush it off, here we go. Right. But I know prior to like thinking about how to deal with failure, I was always like, I was not on the floor, crawled up in a ball crying. But I definitely was like, oh my God, I always beat myself down. I was like, why didn't I do better? Why didn't I do this? One funny failure that happened, and I still have like anxiety about it today, is at a funeral. You know how like they put the konava in the silver trays and you go around and you give it to people, like even on the other side, and
unstable ass trays.
Yeah. Well, we double stacked
That's all I'm
it.
saying.
Yeah. And like I purposely double stacked mine because I'm clumsy, and I was like, I hope they don't tell me to go to the other side where let's say chanduna, because that's where all the drunk uncles sit. They told me to go on that side where the drunk uncles were, and one uncle knocked into me, and Nava spilled on two uncles. And my parents were so ashamed. They were like, why did you let that happen? I'm like, I was like 14 at that time. And I was like, I told you guys not to let me go over there. And I was like, and then a drunk uncle like knocked into me. What am I supposed to do about that? And so now to this day, it's so funny though. I laugh about it now. They don't let me serve Nava.
So that's how you get out of it.
They don't let me serve Nava. And I used to be really offended by that because that made me feel like such a failure in the Hmong community. Like I couldn't do a simple Hmong daughter duty. Culturally, they just like, it's just something they hold against you, because they still are holding it against me now. But it's just like, what are you being told? So now my mindset is just, it happened. How can I move forward from it? Yeah.
And I was going to go back to what you said too. When someone tells you to do something and they do the exact opposite, it's not toxic. I would just say it's normal to want people to walk the walk and talk the talk. And it's like, if you can't do that, then why are you even talking? So I don't think it's toxic, what you said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think from my perspective of like, if you're someone who refuses to fail, like you're just too afraid to take that leap. You don't want to be talked about publicly, because in Hmong community, that shame is rough. Like Emily's still being barred from serving Nava. But I've learned that it's never, I'm just too anxious. Like I'm an overthinker. I've really worked on that piece, and you come to learn that it's never as bad as it seems. Like you make up all these scenarios of how you're going to fail and how bad that failure is going to be. You psych yourself out of opportunities. And in taking some of the leaps that I did in the past years here, I've learned that even if I do not get the outcome I want, it's never as bad as what I thought it was going to be. And if anything, it's better. And I feel really good afterwards. I'm also going to quote a brief Forbes article that I came across, and it said that failure is an inevitable stepping stone on the way to success. So instead of focusing on what went wrong, focus on what could go right next time, what needs working on. How do you guys take the possibility of failure head on now?
I'm not sure I'll ever really get comfortable with failure, but what I've learned now is I try to see the lesson behind it. Mm-hmm. So some of the lessons I've learned is that when you're trying something new, I feel like when you try something new and you fail and fail faster, that does you a lot more good than staying in the path where you're going to fail eventually. And I feel like I've now realized as an older adult that you'll always fail, but it depends on what you do afterwards that defines you. So back to that hotel like messy situation, like I honestly thought it was the end of the world, but what I did afterwards mattered most, because what my client wanted was to be reassured that this would never happen again, and that I would take the steps to make sure that I could double check my work when it comes to room reservations, and also do other things and put other things in place to make sure that never happened again. And I think for me, another thing is that rejection is redirection. So in business is not for the weak, folks. Like, I have been rejected so many times in my life, whether it's people saying no to my services, people not wanting to work with me, people ghosting me, people just everything and anything that you can think of has happened. And I feel like because of that rejection, it makes it easier to almost receive that no, and it makes it easier to just pick yourself back up as well. And so I'm going to connect that with failure's never connected to your self-worth, and it doesn't connect to you as a human being, because you yourself are a separate entity from your business, and you can control and manage your brain on how you feel on failure.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that too. I want to echo everything Ariel said, but also add on to that is sometimes you haven't failed or you did not fail because someone's expectations of you are just too out of the world. And so don't feel like a failure, especially if you're not able to meet someone's expectations, because sometimes their expectations are just not reasonable. So there's that part. And also, like Ariel said, we're all bound to fail. It's a lesson that we take, and how we react to that and how we choose to grow from that is really important. So don't ever think you're a failure if somebody's expectations of you are too high, but also failures help you learn how to move through life. So
Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode regarding failures and rejections. If you have any thoughts or any experiences you want to share, please comment that down below. Again, please give us a like and a follow as well. Thank you.